Good evening. My name is Craig Bodine, and I'm presenting along with McKenzie Cooper for Organizational Problems and Diagnosis and Solutions in the Management 623 class, or 66233 class. I'm sorry. This evening we're going to be discussing the collapse of sense-making in organization, the Mann Gulch disaster. This is our case study that we had been given, and we're going to talk a little bit, and I'll tell you just kind of how the presentation is going to go. We're going to talk a little bit about the flow of it. We're going to talk in some points, and then I'm going to go through some different situations that arose during this disaster, and then how they could be applied to our organization, and then I'll wrap it up with a conclusion at the end. So just a little bit to tell you a little bit about the Mann Gulch disaster. The Mann Gulch disaster took place in 1949 on August 4th. There was a fire, a storm, and lightning struck a tree and started a fire on the 4th. The fire was spotted by the forestry department, and then the smoke jumpers were dispatched out on August 5th of 1949. This took place in Missoula, Montana. And at this time, smoke jumpers were relatively new to this industry. They were only about 9 years old in existence, and basically they were young men, and they were from different backgrounds and were described basically as risk takers. From what the article stated, it talked a little bit about them being forestry students, it talked to them about being military folks, and things like that. So it had all kinds of different individuals that took place that participated as smoke jumpers. During this disaster, as they were being dispatched, some of the concerns that arose was the weather. The weather was a big thing that was going on during this fire. The temperature was 97 degrees. The conditions were extremely explosive. They said they ranked 74 out of 100 during this fire. There were high winds, kind of in the gorge there, or in the valley there where the fire was taking place, and then it kind of rose and went up the side of the hill to the ridge. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little while later. Some of the mistakes that took place during this time was the radios and the supplies and the things like that. The radio today would go on an individual as they go down in their parachute. This radio was set down on its own parachute, and on this incident, this trip, the radio, the chute didn't open and it was destroyed, so they had no communication with others around them for assistance or help when they got to the ground. Also, all their supplies, they had to drop from an elevation of they normally drop from an elevation of 1,200 feet. During this fire, they had to drop from 2,200 feet because of the wind and the turbulence that they had. The plane ride there was so rough that even one of the smoke jumpers wasn't able to continue. He just got sick and wasn't able to go, and so he had to go back with the airplane. So what that caused, when they dropped their supplies from that high altitude, it caused them to scatter out across the valley. They kind of had a designated drop zone that they would like to have on the downside of it, down in the valley area below the fire, assuming that the fire was going to go up the side of the mountain through there. And so when they landed, they were all kind of scattered out. Their supplies were scattered. They were kind of disshuffled. So it took them a little while to kind of gather their bearings, gather all their supplies back up, and then organize. By this time, it was kind of later in the evening. They decided to eat dinner and kind of gathered themselves, and then they went on about tackling this fire. Some of the points that we talk about, Wick talks about, he highlights some of the shortcomings of this organization in this article, and we're going to discuss a little bit of those. We're going to talk about sense-making mistakes. We're going to talk about reaction to difficult situations and some of the role structure mistakes that were found and pretty obvious in this as well. So before we start, we're going to talk about what is an organization as it pertains to this article. Wesley defines it as a group of individuals that have a series of interlocking routines, habituated action patterns that bring the same people together around the same activities in the same time and places. So if you use the smoke jumpers, for example, is what they're basing this on, it fits the structure, and that's outlined by Mitzberg. Mitzberg defines an organization by these 5 criteria points. Coordination by direct supervision. All organizations function and operate the same way. So most of us have direct supervision or give direct supervision. Strategy planned at the top. And that's pretty typical for most organizations as well. The leadership is from top down. And then a little formalized behavior, and then organic structure, and the person in charge tending to formulate plans is basically a reflection of their own personality. So their guidance and direction is based on their personality, and that's kind of what it is, kind of how it's described. The Mann Gulch crew in this article is described as generic subjectivity, which means the roles and rules exist to enable individuals to be interchanged with little disruption. In our organizations today, I don't see that that's always the case. You hear a lot of people say it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and everyone's trying to get themselves ahead, and it's all about me. So a lot of organizations, I believe, operate with, I'm the wealth of knowledge. I'm the one they need to come to. I'm the one that should be chosen as the team leader, and stuff like that. So in an organization, sometimes that's not always good. In the long run, I think that hurts the team. And so what happens to that organization if that person leaves? There's a big weak link. If this person can only do A, this person can only do B and C, and then somebody leaves, your processes don't get complete, or they aren't. You've got a missing link there, and so that kind of causes issues. The organization that I work with now, it's operating from the top down as well. But our managers and things like that are very good about sharing knowledge and training, cross-training us for different positions and different things like that. So that's, and I feel like that makes us a very strong team. So, in a lot of organizations, when they do face that, like if they have a missing link in their organization, or they've got something going on, and they're faced with new obstacles, the structure falls apart. Some of your employees will become anxious and find it harder to make sense of what's happening until finally they're unable to make any sense whatsoever. And the same thing happened here at the Mann Gulch. They couldn't even see the one thing that would have saved their lives, which was an escape fire, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So, so when you get in a situation like that and your organization's falling apart, you're facing different things, you're having a hard way seeing, your employees are all anxious, you want to step back and do an organizational analysis. That's known, a lot of times that's known to be as simple as decision making, and most times for most organizations that's habitual. It's how we've done it in the past. This is how we're going to deal with this. This is the same kind of situation we've had back in June, whatever the case may be. And so that's sometimes that's a little bit difficult. Some of the breakdowns that we're going to talk about this evening as well is some of the role structure problems that they had. So during the fire, they were like I said, 15 men. 13 of them passed away, and 2 of them lived, but has since passed. So the role structure problem that we have. Once leadership was passed off to Hellman, the crew became confused, and the role structure changed. So Dodge was the top guy. He was the crew chief or the leader of this team. But when he landed, he delegated Hellman to take the crew down towards a river, and that kind of confused him a little bit. So once this happens, the individual, some of the team members, I guess, tend to jockey for position, to feel like they should have been the one selected for this task. So once the leader or the team leader has delegated duties to the next person and selected someone, sometimes there's some tension within the team that, hey, I'm the all-knowing one, like we talked a little bit about a second ago. I should have been picked for that position, or I should have been given that duty or task. And so sometimes that causes some structure, and that was the case here when Hellman was asked to take his crew the other way. The second role structure incident happened when Dodge told his crew to throw away your tools. As a smoke jumper, I can only imagine what they carried with them. I'm sure they had maybe some kind of rake. They probably had a pick. They probably had a saw of some sort to clear brush and dig dirt, throw dirt, whatever they were doing there, however they fought them back then. So Dodge told them to throw away their tools. So at this point, I'm a smoke jumper, and the team leader says, "Throw away your tools." I'm thinking, you've lost your mind. This is the only thing I have to stay alive out here with. And this caused chaos to the men as well, as they were unfamiliar with that order. And they were like, yeah, I'm not. And some of them didn't, and some of them did. So usually as chaos prevails is when a team starts to fall apart, and that's what took place during this time. But they did, there is a spot of resilience in this within this team as well. Dodge's invention of burning a hole in the fire that we talked about a little bit in the opening there was relatively new, but he kind of understood how that works. So how come no one on his team went with him through the hole and lived through that way? That's kind of the question. Always a solution when times are tough. There's always a solution when times are tough. That's hard to see, but in this case, that was the case for Dodge. But during this fire, they're going up the side of the mountain. The fire is fastly approaching them from the bottom of the valley, kind of up the side of the mountain. They're thinking, hey, we'll go to the top of the ridge. There'll be less oxygen, less fuel. This fire will kind of die down a little bit. Maybe we can get to the ridge and get out of here alive. What Dodge is doing is he's throwing fire. He's starting fires in front of him, burning grass ahead of him, and then he's running through that, and then he's laid down in that burnt spot and saved, down in the ground in that burnt spot there, and he lived as the fire burned on around him and went on. But everybody else kind of progressed up the hill, and most of them didn't make it. One other man made it, but he made it to the top of the ridge, and he was able to get into a crevice in the mountain up there, and he survived as well. So, but a lot of organizations kind of are that way. It's trial by fire. An important item discussed in this article is having an attitude of wisdom. If we approach every fire like we're going to put it out in 10 minutes, we don't even think about the possibility of becoming those fires becoming large. So how do we deal with the big fires at this time within our organizations if we don't have that prior training? So that was kind of one of the things. And then organizations need to be prepared for the unexpected. Like in this example, when the temperature reached a fatal 140 degrees, people can neither validate their impressions with a trusted neighbor, nor pay close attention to a boss whose commands are difficult to understand. So, when an employee or when you're going through a situation that you're just has you so frazzled or has you off your game that you're not even to make a wise decision, that's kind of a difficult thing as well. So, what's the article's contents add to the conversation? So we'll talk a little bit about, due to the turbulence of the plane ride, one of the jumpers returned to the plane, like I said, and the radio's parachute was separated and was destroyed, and due to the high winds, equipment was scattered a quarter of the way down the canyon. His accuracy was way off since they jumped from high altitude. So, to kind of wrap this up, and my conclusion on this is diagnosis and problem solving. It says, as an organization must always be looking to the future, our team, and the direction we are trying to go. We must be watching for landmines or possible attacks on either side. And an organizational landmine could be something like changing legislation that affects our business. So how do we best do this? And we evaluate who we have surrounded ourselves with, who our employees are, who our board members are, who our leaders are within the organization, our team. We have to learn from the past because that's a good way to prepare for the future, to help us prepare for the future. And we also need to examine our culture, and that that'll help us navigate through those difficult times. A culture, this culture that they had with the smoke jumpers here. Not everybody was familiar with, burning a hole in the fire. So not all of them were on board. So the culture has to be established as well. As Dodge is the leader, or Dodge was the leader, and then they needed. I'm not sure they really understood the structure, because once they were separated and divided, there's problems that arose with individuals as far as trying to escape this fire. So this fire was devastating. It was kind of an interesting read. I hadn't read it before, but there are some good examples and good applications in this article to help us as leaders in our organization guide and direct us. There are some good wisdom, some good points in there to help us improve our organization as we go forward. So with that, I'll close, and we will wrap it up. Thank you for your time.